Over the past couple months in my, what I've been learning in college, I learned about a very interesting woman who I greatly admired and I thought was very special and amazing. But she's not very well known outside of academic circles. So I thought I might say something to all so you can all know about her, learn about her, and I think it's just better for more people to know of her existence. Her name is Simone Weil. You can put up a picture. Okay. This International Women's Day, I wanted to speak about a very special woman that very few know of, Simone Weil. She was a French philosopher, mystic, and political activist. But most importantly, she was one of the very few people to ever live a life where there was no conflict between her beliefs and her actions. Whatever she did, she believed in, and whatever she believed in, she did. The famous French writer and philosopher Albert Camus described her as the only great spirit of our times. When she was young, she had a unique characteristic among children, a sort of inverted sense of justice. All children naturally have a very acute sense of justice. You can see this if you give one child a large candy bar and another child a small one. The one with the small one will instantly know that this is unjust. Weil was upset when things were unfair. However, inverted in that she was always upset when she got an advantage over someone else. When she was only 6 years old, 1915, her family had to relocate through a long, harsh trek through the snow. And when she saw that her 10-year-old older brother had a heavier backpack than her, she refused to take a single step until she had an equally heavy backpack.
Wow.
Again, at 6 years old, she refused to eat any sugar in solidarity with the soldiers on the Western Front. And in 1910, she declared herself a Bolshevik. And in her late teens, she became heavily involved in the workers' movement. Having such a strong sense of justice and equality at such a young age really sets her apart as a very special person in history. She studied philosophy at university, eventually completing the equivalent of a master's degree. During these years, she began being called the Red Virgin. Red for her socialist and anarchist political views, and virgin for her lack of care of her appearance. She seldom wore any makeup and often wore men's clothes. In order to shut up the Red Virgin, she was assigned to a teaching position in a very small clerical town in the French countryside. There was a depression going on at the time, so many of the townsfolk were out of jobs and had to make their living breaking stones, like prison labor, where you would get paid based on how many stones you broke down. They were all homeless. Most of them could barely afford 2 meals a day. When Weil arrived, she organized the homeless to march to the mayor's office in unison and demand better wages. It was quite shocking to the conservative Catholic people of this tiny town when they saw homeless people marching through the streets while singing the Internationale. The mayor agreed to their demands and made an offer to increase their wages. However, Weil told the homeless people to refuse the better wages and go on strike. As homeless people cannot financially strike by not doing work, they did a moral strike, where they refused to be part of the society until the society treated them right. It worked. The townspeople felt bad, and the mayor increased their pay even more on top of the initial increase. When word reached the newspapers, her professor stated that only Simone Weil can make homeless people go on an unemployment strike. Simone was so dedicated to equality that she mirrored the living conditions of the poorest people in the population. She refused to buy anything pricey. She forwent having heating in her home, even through harsh winters. She often underate to match the eating habits of the poor, and she even worked in a factory for a year. She did not believe that intellectuals can sincerely know about the conditions of the working class without experiencing it for themselves. Because of her strong belief in justice and equality, she had an equally strong hatred of fascism when it began to pop up in Europe. When the Spanish Civil War began, she traveled to Spain and volunteered to fight alongside the anarchists against the fascists. However, she was very sickly, short-sighted, and frail, not that good at combat. Sometime during the war, she had hit a pot of boiling liquid because of her short-sightedness and had gotten noticeable burns. And her family had to come to Spain, pick her up, and bring her back home to France. But on returning to Paris, Weil continued to write essays on labor, management, war, and peace. She continued her fight against fascism during World War II, where she attempted to help the resistance in France. When France was eventually taken over, she made her way to England to continue to support the war effort there. where she attempted to start a volunteer program where nurses would go to the front lines to help soldiers. It was never approved, probably because there was still a stigma of women on the front lines back then. But she helped in any way she could. And I think it's a good time. We have a nice artist rendition of her, such as that.
Oh, wow.
Near the end of her life, she began to be interested in Christian mysticism, along with politics and philosophy. While in Assisi in the spring of 1937, Weil experienced a religious ecstasy in the Basilica of Santa Maria, the same church in which St. Francis of Assisi prayed. She had another, more powerful revelation a year later while reciting George Herbert's poem, Love 3, after which she said, Christ himself came down and took possession of me. And from 1938 on, her writings became more mystical and spiritual, but still retaining their focus on social and political issues. Weil did not limit her curiosity to Christianity, however. She was keenly interested in other religious traditions, especially the Greek religion, Egyptian, Hinduism, especially the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, and Mahayana Buddhism. She believed that all these and other traditions contained elements of genuine revelation, writing that Greece, Egypt, ancient India, the beauty of the world, the pure and authentic reflection of this beauty in art and science. These things have done as much as the visibly Christian ones to deliver me into Christ's hands as his captive. I think I might even say more. Towards the end of her life, she was hospitalized. She was very sickly. And in these last couple of months, she was very focused on being baptized into the Catholic Church. She was very set on having that. However, she was denied for several reasons, some of them being that whenever she would talk about God in casual conversation, she would refer to it as Krishna, not God. And she was often very critical of some of the Bible, especially the more violent rhetoric as, kill those people, you're the chosen land, you're right in killing them. She criticized a lot of that stuff, and they were not happy with that. And ironically, when she was hospitalized, when the hospital staff heard that a philosophy professor was going to be staying there, they were worried that she would not be comfortable being in the same room as the working class sick people in the hospital. Obviously, they didn't really know her. And while she was in the hospital, she refused to drink any milk because the children of Britain did not have any milk either. This during World War II, England was being bombed, food was rationed, and if the children couldn't have milk, why should she? She refused it. Unfortunately, after a lifetime of battling illness, Weil died in August 1943 at the age of 34 from cardiac failure. She probably could have lived a lot longer had she not helped herself to live as the lowest in her society. As I said, she often underate and lived through harsh cold without any sort of heating to mirror the conditions of the poor. However, even if she had lived longer by not doing these things, she would no longer be the person she was. So knowledgeable of the working class struggle, so compassionate and so dedicated to equality and justice. I'll end this with a quote by French politician and war hero Maurice Schumann, who said that since her death, there was hardly a day where the thought of her life did not serve as a moral guide to him. I encourage you all to do the same. Use her memory as a reminder to point out and stand up to inequality of all forms. Thank you.